Tzeporah Berman burst into national prominence in 1993 as a spokesperson for the Friends of Clayoquot Sound during the anti-clear-cutting demonstrations that became the largest act of civil disobedience in Canadian history. Along with 850 others, she found herself jailed. She later led a brilliant campaign to persuade Victoria's Secret to stop printing its catalogues on paper made from old-growth forests. More recently, she has focused on the fight against climate change, which is the greatest of all threats against the survival of old-growth forests.
20 years ago, in fact, this summer was the anniversary of the Clayoquot Sound blockades, 1993, so 20 years ago. I actually came to British Columbia originally because I was a student and I was interested in environmental issues, and I'd heard about what was happening in Canada's rainforests. And it's funny, I knew so much about Brazilian rainforests, but at the time I didn't even know Canada had rainforests. And I came out to the West Coast to do some research and fell in love with these 300-foot tall trees and these ancient ecosystems. And then I found out that they were being clear-cut logged to make phone books and toilet paper, and I was just so angry. And I'd started doing research, and for 2 summers I did scientific research in the rainforest. And the 3rd summer I came back to do more. The area that we had been researching had been completely logged. And I heard that there were some protests up in Clayoquot Sound. The local community was protesting, and I'd never been to a protest in my life. I was an academic, and I just thought, you know, this is taking too long, this scientific research. They're not listening to it. I'm going to go see what those protests are like. And to make a long story very short, I ended up working that first summer to support the community and learn what it was all about. And then I came back the following year, and my friends called me, I remember April 1993, and they said, can you come back to Clayoquot Sound? Because the government's made a decision to log the majority of it, and we need your help. And so I came back and I ended up becoming the blockade coordinator. And that summer, 10,000 people came to that remote rainforest. Over 1,000 were arrested. It was the largest civil disobedience in Canada's history. I was arrested and charged with 900 counts of criminal aiding and abetting.
Quite a summer for an academic.
Yeah.
So you've had great success with forest ethics, and then you turn your attention to climate change. How did that transition take place?
Well, I thought a lot about this. Last year I wrote a book called This Crazy Time, which was published by NOP Canada, which is stories from the campaigns that I've run. And I write a lot about what I call climate reckoning, because I think everyone has it in their own way. I knew about climate change. You can't work on environmental issues and not know about climate change. But it was something that I kept reading scary reports about, and I was glad somebody else worked on it. You know, I had spent my entire adult life working on forestry and conservation and the trade of wood and paper products. And then one day a map crossed my desk that showed literally millions of acres of forest dying as a result of beetle infestations in British Columbia. The pine beetle used to die every winter because it dies at -40 degrees, but it doesn't get -40 degrees in the interior anymore. And so the pine beetle doesn't die. It just eats its way through millions of acres of forest. And so I started realizing that not just the pine beetle, but the fires in the Amazon and the boreal that were now destroying millions of acres of forest as well, threatened our forests as much, if not more, as industrial logging. So here I'd spent my whole adult life trying to protect these forests, and now they were going up in smoke, literally. And that was the moment for me that I realized I need to better understand climate change. I need to understand what's causing it. And it seems like it's not okay anymore for people to just say, I'm glad someone else works on it. I ended up being invited to the United Nations Climate Change Conference in Bali that year to give a speech on the impact of global warming on forests. And that conference changed my life. I sat in the audience when the Secretary General of the United Nations said, we either reach an agreement here to reduce global warming emissions, fossil fuel emissions, or we are dooming humanity to oblivion in our lifetimes. And I remember sitting there in the audience thinking, did you just say dooming humanity to oblivion? Like, I have said far less radical things and been called, you know, crazy names. And this is the Secretary General of the United Nations. So I decided to go to every scientific panel I could go to try and understand the current state of the science and the impacts of climate change. And what I found was horrifying. You know, today, climate change, more people lose their homes around the world as a result of climate change than war. Hundreds of thousands of people have died this year as a result of climate change. And when I started working on these issues, it was because of a deep love of our forest, you know, a love of big trees and bears. But in the climate era, these are no longer environmental issues. These are the moral challenge of our age. And climate change affects our environment, of course, but it also affects whether our children will have a stable economy, a stable climate. And I'm a mother. So I changed everything I do. I stopped working on forest conservation and I started focusing on fossil fuels. How do we stop burning oil and coal and start catalyzing a shift to renewable energy to fuel society? Because if we don't, within 10 years, all we will be doing is trying to figure out how to adapt to a changing climate and frequent violent storms.
Now that's a hard sell that brings you directly into conflict, among other things, with the government of Canada.
It does, because the Harper government is not a government that is science-based. They are a very ideological government that has designed their entire economic policy on scaling up oil development, and specifically oil sands in Canada. It's almost like it's their blind spot. And their approach to this information about climate change and the impacts of climate change is to shut it down. So in the last 2 years, almost every single scientific or economic body that has been researching the impacts of climate change and how Canada should deal with it has been shut down by the Harper government. The National Roundtable on Environment and Economy, that for 6 years straight produced reports saying, we can do this, we can address climate change, we can create a healthy economy and reduce our emissions. The government shut it down. Even though it was a conservative government set up the National Roundtable on Environment and Economy to make sure environment and economy was balanced in this country 16 years ago under Mulroney. Now, the Harper government shut it down. The Atmospheric Research Station, which was some of the most important climate data in the world, many climatologists from around the world looked to Canada for that data, shut down. Experimental Lakes Initiative, which was one of the only initiatives in the world that looks at how to deal with the toxins that industrial society produces, and up until last year was doing very important research on the tar sands, shut down. And you know, they say it's because of budget concerns. Experimental Lakes Initiative cost about $2 million to run. In the same omnibus bill where they shut down all of those bodies, the government increased the funding for Canadian Revenue Agency, $8 million. And they did that so Canadian Revenue Agency could put under audit every single environmental group in this country. So that you have environmental charities not able to be a watchdog for what the government is doing, but instead fighting for their lives under this conservative government. And also in that same omnibus bill, they removed 70 environmental laws in one fell swoop. Fisheries protection, fisheries habitat protection in the Fisheries Act, water protection in the Navigable Waters Act. And they did it because it was in the way of increased oil sands development and pipelines. But I think it's critical that we vote based on information about the issues that are going to affect our future and our capacity to function as a country. And so I think we need to look at climate leadership. We need to look at environmental leadership. And this government has consistently promised quite a lot and delivered nothing and moved us in the opposite direction. We've had 6 years of promises to do climate leadership, oil and gas regulations, but they've never done a single thing. And in fact, they've increased climate pollution in this country significantly. This is a government that doesn't tell the truth and is ruthless in its drive to expand dirty energy development and make a lot of money off it. And so I think that Canadians need to get involved and understand that and to vote accordingly.
Climate change is the overarching issue of our time. It's already transformed our planet, and our failure to take serious action about it raises the age-old question about whether there really is intelligent life on Earth. Among the people we've interviewed, James Hogan attempts to explain that failure. George Monbiot argues that we can avoid the worst consequences by mobilizing effectively and immediately, while Gwyn Dyer assumes that new climate realities will inevitably usher in an era of widespread regional wars and refugee crises. Tzeporah Berman is clearly not alone. For the Green Interview, I'm Silver Donald Cameron. See you next time.